Candy, look out! There's a great gyros nearby!
What?
Great gyros?
Some great gyros?
What? No, Candy, you know this one. Look at him!
Oh, him? Yes, I totally forgot.
What do you mean you forgot?
Well, he isn't particularly memorable.
Yeah, well, you know, that's just like, your opinion, man.
Ladies, gentlemen, and monsters of all ages, today it is time to talk about new monsters! Really? Well, not literally, but for a lot of people, these might as well be new monsters. Forgotten by a large portion of the community, either due to a poor moveset or simply being a lower tier monster that wasn't part of any endgame, these guys all slipped from the minds of every hunter that I've talked to. Now, this is excluding subspecies, or else this list would span from blue Yonkut-ku to green Plesioth, but I think you'll see a few monsters on this list and think, hey, why isn't anyone talking about the possibility of this monster coming to Iceborne? So without further ado, here are my top 5 forgotten monsters, specifically with the idea of how they would return in the new world.
Number 5, Hipnaka Trees.
You can't keep me cooped up in here, okay? I am a peacock! You gotta let me fly!
As far as they go, bird wyverns tend to be one of the less, well, cool classifications of monster. From Yonkut-ku to Gypsaros to Kuliaku to Pookie, you can describe most of these monsters as derpy and cute, but the only one in this classification that I would attribute the word cool to is Malfestio, and he is an incredibly unique case. Hipnaka Trees, as far as I can tell, was actually the first attempt at a legitimately cool bird wyvern, and an attempt was made. See, the visuals of Hipnaka Trees, in my opinion, are actually really neat, and putting him next to the other bird wyverns, it becomes clear that he actually looks way more like a bird than most of his classification. But unfortunately, it is in his moveset that Hipnaka Trees failed, and it was a failure so significant that it left this bird in obscurity while his cousins continued to grow and multiply around him. That failure of moveset, well, Hipnaka Trees, regardless of how different he looked, was essentially just a Yonkut-ku with sleep instead of fire. Not just in attack structure, but in some cases, the literal derpy animations are ripped off of Yonkut-ku. And the second you put derpy pecking animations or derpy running animations on a creature that looks like this, you're removing all of the cool factor you have tried to build for him. Like, honestly, as cool as he looks while just standing still, actually watching him fight is sort of disturbing, if anything. As far as bringing him to the new world, I think a bird focused this much around his beauty would translate fantastically into Iceborne's engine. However, even if you don't change the idea of his moves, being mostly pecks and charges, you have to give him a slicker animation, make him really flow like a monster who has some idea how to fight. I get that these guys don't enjoy killing necessarily, but if you're going to make something look like this, but then act like that, then you have already doomed the creature to be forgotten forever.
Number 4, Blayne Ganga.
Lords, why are you slapping a monkey?
While the list of fanged beasts isn't particularly long, it is a list of particularly interesting and unusual monsters, and when you share a category with Rajang, Kongalala, Lagambi, and Gammoth, it can be a little bit hard to stand out, especially when you are essentially just a big mustachioed monkey who can throw snow occasionally. The mustache was a good choice, though. If there was one thing about Blaganga that would make me remember him, it is the skin mustache. Please don't say the words skin and mustache together again. And of course, the big bald purple head that looks like somebody donked him in an old-timey cartoon. When it comes to his reason for obscurity, Blayne Ganga tells a tale that we'll see here again, which is simply being such an early game creature that there was not much reason to think about him after facing him the first time. Personally, as an introductory monkey, I think he actually works great move-wise for the moves that he has. Blayne Ganga's problem is simply that he doesn't really stand out as a positive experience compared to his counterparts. I guess you could say he is bland Ganga. Boo! But I would argue that Blayne Ganga quite possibly got the reverse treatment of Hipnaka Trees. By all rights, based on his face, Blayne Ganga was intended to be a really silly and derpy monster, but then the personality and moves that attributed to him is super serious and focused. This type of visual mismatch can work occasionally. See, Zamtrios, for instance, cool monster with cool moves, and he just goes into a fucking balloon at one point. As for a way to fix Blayne Ganga to make him more recognizable, however, I think he either needs a moveset more like Kongalala, which leans more towards the funny side and really builds on that silly personality, or he needs to be made a much higher tier monster with higher damage attacks, because on a base level he does share some things with Rajang, so if you up his damage, you could make him feel a lot more like a tiny ice Rajang, rather than right now where he just feels like he picked some monkey off the street, threw him in the Arctic, hit him in the head with an animated hammer, and
say the line, Bart!
Gave him a skin mustache.
Number 3, Vestboy Queen.
High on the rapids,
It struck their tiny raft. Ah! That's good. And plunged them down. I'm so tired.
When it comes to insects in the Monster Hunter series, they are few and far between, but at least as far as the large monsters are concerned, they have been fantastic pretty much across the board, with Adolka, the Celtis duo, and Nursilla, who technically isn't an insect, but is totally alone in her classification, so I wanted to bring her in and make her feel loved. In fact, the only large monster based around an insect that isn't in any way memorable is the one that was introduced to the series first, the Vestboy Queen. Now, I think the interesting part about the Vestboy Queen is that it did actually have a couple of unique mechanics, and visually looked pretty much as it should have, just a big Vestboy. The problem, I think, was that the technology available in the Monster Hunter engine at the time of her introduction to the series was simply not strong enough to make her mechanics even noticeable. On a base level, and the way most people probably remember the Vestboy Queen, she's just a large Vestboy. Not many attack animations, just sort of flies around, attacks you to paralyze you, slowly getting beat on until she dies. The Vestboy Queen, though, does actually feature a very light pack fighting mechanic. As a default, there are generally Vestboids around the Queen, and generally they will try to stop you, but not much more than a regular Vestboid can. However, the Vestboy Queen can spray out the defense down element in a sort of gas, which on top of adding a layer to the base fight, also acts as a pheromone for the regular Vestboids. Any Vestboid that comes into contact with the gas becomes incredibly aggressive and is more than willing to sacrifice itself for the crown, so to say. And now that I've said that, for you guys watching the fight that you are seeing on screen right now, and listening to my description of the actual mechanics that exist, doesn't it just feel wrong? And I honestly think that is a failure of the technology more than anything. I think if Vestboy Queen returned today with the exact same concept and given the new world migration treatment, she could be one of the more unique and in fact fun monsters in the entire series.
Number 2, Catcha Wakka.
Can I ask you a question? Sure. Why don't you go back to your own house and stop bothering us?
I am the one.
As we get to the final portion of this video, it is important to consider why this list even has rankings. Of these 5 forgotten monsters, some of them are more or less forgotten than others, but the ranking isn't for how forgotten they are, it is for how undeserved I think that forgetting is. Catcha Wakka may be the least forgotten of the monsters on this list, but he is absolutely one of the most deserving to be brought back and remembered, because his gorgeous visuals, his incredible and actually interesting fight, and his quirky and lovable personality that includes a switch to his actual face shape when he enrages as an attempt to actually look scarier, is just awesome. Him as a whole is just crazy cool, and he's just a fantastic creature all the way through. Catcha Wakka unfortunately suffers from early game monster syndrome. Sometimes the greatest crime in this game is that the more interesting and unusual monsters are simply put too early in the game. They wind up having little no part in endgame, and then by the time the next generation comes around, they're totally forgotten. Even if every time you mention their name, you'll hear someone in the room light up with, "Oh, I love that guy." Timmy, you don't even know what a Catcha Wakka is. I do now. And there is good reason for that. If Catcha Wakka were to come to the new world, I don't even think he would need many mechanical changes or visual changes or personality changes. Obviously, he could stand to gain a lot from the graphical upgrades in World's engine, as it would seriously boost both his cute factor and his scary factor in Enrage, but I think as a whole, he is one of the only 2 monsters on this list who I would happily have in Monster Hunter World as is. The other one, of course, is...
Number 1, Volvadon.
Now 2 in China have blown Scotland's pair off the
Volvadon.
scale. They're doing roly-polies. Look at him go.
Oh yeah, he exists. I know you forgot. Don't lie to me. And this here might actually be one of the biggest singular injustices in the entire Monster Hunter series. That injustice being Volvadon's popularity. Visually speaking, he is essentially a big red mix between a pangolin and a bear, which is fucking fantastic. His moveset borrows from Chameleos, who is beloved, and Uragon, who isn't necessarily as loved, but absolutely is remembered, as well as having access to paralysis and the soil ailment, so you can't really say he's boring either. I think the reason that Volvadon has fallen to obscurity actually is simply the execution of his visuals on old world graphics. Because of the older engine, his armored shell winds up looking like just red skin, and his colorful underbelly, which you can still see up close, it's like very pearlescent, often just looks like a white blob. And his standing animation and some movement is directly taken from Arzuros, who, while I love, is a silly monster. He's meant to be silly. His tongue hangs out and he eats honey. Volvadon isn't meant to be quite as silly. silly, so having borrowed animations just makes his personality not shine through quite as effectively. It makes it very muddy. I honestly think that Volvadon could be a number of people's favorite monsters if it were brought into the new world and given a little bit of animation updating. Between his long, whippy tongue, his really cool mix of real-life animals, his color scheme, his visuals, at least in concept if not in execution, and then the fact that his fight itself is actually really enjoyable. He rolls a lot, so it can feel a little bit Uragan-y, but he's smaller than Uragan, which is more manageable, and he actually uses the rolling as a method of dodging occasionally, which makes it infinitely more interesting to me than Uragan's rolling has ever been. I just really have nothing negative to say about Volvadon in the way that he was put into the game and the way that he plays out. The only way to make him better is to just put him in world and do a super basic animation rework and update his graphics to make him look gorgeous. Bring back the roly-poly ant-eating fireproof bear. There's nothing more to it, just put him in the goddamn game! Alright everyone, this has been my list of the top 5 forgotten monsters to return in Iceborne. Do you agree with my choices? Are there any that I forgot? Like if you liked the video, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet. This is the brand new outro to tell you all the things that you do that we love, so let's start with something simple and say, oh, we love your eyes. When they're watching us play video games, when we make a bunch of jokes that are kinda lame, or when they gaze upon our failures as we try to kill the monsters or report important news about the kingdom Animalia. Rage, Continent, Hollow, we're all here, talking about the things you want to hear, so if you want to be the first to hear, like and subscribe and the bell and we'll cheer. Some of you are patrons even though we are all the noobs and you're the pros. There's nothing we can do to thank you. No, really, there's nothing we could possibly do. Goodbye.